Uh, what I think is interesting from my many years of experience is that structured democratic dialogue is a very interesting invention. And I have to give a lot of credit to John Warfield for that, which I remember vividly, when I met him in 1970. And that was our first encounter. What happened is I was making a presentation at a conference in Bucharest, Romania, and I had done some structural work by exploring combinations between different factors to generate scenarios for the future of Greece, in fact. That was in 1972. And that was the time that Greece was under a dictatorship. So I presented these scenarios, and there were a lot of combinatorics to come up with those scenarios. Warfield was in the audience. He came to me and he said, how did you do that? How did you generate those scenarios? It took a lot of time to make the combinations. And I said, yes, it takes a lot of time, but I didn't do it because I didn't have the time. I programmed my son, Huan Yan, my Chinese son, to do it because he was very patient and very methodical. So it took him a lot of time to make these combinations. Now, why am I saying that? Because at that time, Warfield invited me to visit him in Columbus, Ohio. So I went to Columbus, Ohio. First time he explained to me the interpretive structural modeling algorithm, which essentially was a way to make these combinations very efficiently. So instead of taking, let's say, a day, you can build a structure in 2 hours. So I thought that was a breakthrough because it would enable people that are busy to connect the dots. And I was convinced at the time that connecting the dots was a very significant contribution to make because there was a gap between the complexity, the situational complexity, and the capacity of human beings to deal with it. So Warfield's contribution was to make those combinations more efficient, and because of that, that's the real uniqueness. There are other attributes in SDD that are unique, but this one is significant because it is a way to create entities by making the combinations and to create them essentially to give average people from different walks of life, the capacity to do systemic thinking. And systemic thinking is exactly what is needed to address situational complexity. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but the question was, what's the question again?
What do you believe is true
It's
about
true.
structured democratic
Well,
dialogue?
what is true?
Even though you can't prove it.
Oh, well, I cannot prove it. Well, the only proof that we have is anecdotal evidence from people who have experienced it. And also, we have been able to get evidence of results or outcomes from collabs that have been implemented successfully. Most of them, by the way, happens to be in the private sector for some reason. And that's another thing that is disappointing to me, is that the private sector, for some reason, because the criteria for success are different and they're more visible or more transparent, you can actually measure the success of the stakeholder engagement in the private sector more reliably than you can do in the public sector. However, I think that even if we don't have measurable indicators of success, I believe that the contribution is that people appreciate the experience, and sometimes because they appreciate the experience, they change their behavior. And the changing of the behavior is a significant contribution in terms of the evolution of a social system. So that's my answer.